One of the joys of being a young father to a 5-year-old is that somehow, somewhere in the collective subconscious of parenthood, the 5th birthday party has become the Lego birthday. I know this because upon the first 5th birthday party we were invited to for our son Jack, as we were walking up and down the toy aisle, I turned to Christy and holding a box of Star Wars Legos, I said, "Andy's old enough for Legos, right?" And I know this because when Jack turned 5 last fall, suddenly we had more Legos in the house than I ever had in my entire life. I was thrilled. But I imagine parents in the room are already a few steps beyond me looking at my naive exuberance. Because when this first started out, there was unlimited Lego creations to be built. But these opportunities soon turned to tears. Many my own when I stepped on my first Lego with bare feet in the middle of the night. But also Jack's, the first time one of his original creations came crashing to the ground. I remember it. It was a spaceship. It wasn't anything too elaborate, too exciting, but he created it, and it was the coolest spaceship you could ever imagine. But then it crashed, shattered across the hard wood of the dining room floor. First, there was the sound of the plastic hitting the wood. Then there was silence. And then there was the sound of an inconsolable 5-year-old. "It's broken, it's broken. I'll never have a spaceship again." "It's okay, buddy. I can fix it. Don't worry about it." "No, it's ruined forever. It's broken." At this point, I pause. I see that Jack has left for Children's Chapel, thank God, because this is how you ruin a child, by the way. The refrain of it's broken, continued for much longer than I'd care to remember. And what started as a compassionate, sympathetic voice of a friendly father eventually gave way to frustration, anger, and my own despair. But the hardest part of watching my newly turned 5-year-old in tears over his toys wasn't the regret that I forgot to tell him how Legos worked, that you can just put them back together. But it was that I felt that I was watching the early childhood equivalent to my own anxious reactions to life's bumps and bruises. Sometimes I feel like so much as a paper cut throws me off my game. And while it's been years since I've last cried over Legos, although not as many as you'd like to think, it hasn't been very long since I found myself in prayer, exasperated on my knees to God in a state of hopelessness. "God, how long is this," insert truly manageable problem here, "going to continue?" How often my prayer life is, "I'm broken, it's ruined forever. God, I'm broken. Why me?" This can be referred to as the Humpty Dumpty syndrome. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Brokenness, sometimes we fear, has a state of permanence. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself if sometimes you move through life with a case of the Humpty Dumptys? Like Jack, or like myself, faced with an issue, your first instinct is to focus on your irreparable brokenness. If your answer is no to this question, that's great. You have it all together. Please call me later this week. Tell me your secret. I will fire my therapist and I will pay you what I pay him. I hope you take Cigna. But if not, and you relate to this all too well, I think that's okay. I hope that's okay. Because when I read stories like the one in Acts today, I have to believe that the reason we're reminded time and time again of the miraculous nature of God throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament is that those who were writing believed that the church then and still now has to be reminded that the times when we feel most broken, God is not only in control, but can heal all wounds. All wounds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want us to think about what's going on right now in the book of Acts. Right now we find ourselves still in the 9th chapter, and there are these two parallel storylines playing out. First, last week we heard of the iconic story of Paul's conversion from Saul. And this week we shift our attention to Peter and healing or raising from the dead Tabitha the disciple. It becomes very clear to us that the author of Acts very strongly wants to make the point that while Christ died on the cross and was resurrected and ascended and is no longer present physically in the world, God is still the primary doer, is alive and still very, very present. Sure, we can look at Peter as the primary player in this story. He is the one who is called and goes to Tabitha and says, "Tabitha, get up," in a very dramatic moment. But I think that when we look at the story, there is a far more interesting force at work. And I want us to focus this morning on the community in Joppa, because that's what I find incredibly interesting. We're actually given a lot of information about Tabitha and the community in Joppa, both in the text, but when we read through the lines. First, we know that Tabitha was known for her good works in charity. We have a pretty good idea that the disciples and those around her were robed in clothing that she made. She had a ministry of clothing the poor. But we also get the idea that Tabitha wasn't just a mere member of this community. First, we get that sense by the way that Scripture refers to her in two names. We hear that her name in Greek is Dorcas, and then in Aramaic, it's Tabitha. So we know that she most likely had an impact on more than one community in the languages that knew her name. But furthermore, we get an understanding that the fact that they sent two disciples out to find the nearby Peter tells us that there was a priority in haste to the desire to heal Tabitha, to raise Tabitha from the dead. In the language that churches know best, we might call her a pillar in the community, if you will. And if you've ever been a member of an institution, particularly here at CHT long enough, you know what it feels like for a community to lose one of its pillars. And maybe as this very sentence enters the air, you start thinking about faces and names of those who we've lost, those pillars in a community who are so important that when they leave us, the community is never the same. You know how important they are to a community's life, but you also know how important the community winds up becoming in the lives of those who mourn most intimately the loss of one of these pillars. The family, the spouses, the children. Their impact is felt by more than just us here. In this relatively short time that I've been at CHT, I've seen this community act as agents of healing on behalf of God time and time again in the lives of those who mourn the pillars of this community. I've seen it through phone calls, through pastoral visits. I've seen it by those who just sit and listen and provide company, maybe a hug, a prayer, a smile. so much healing is felt by those who have been helped by those who call this place home. And this is not by accident. It is not simply because this place is filled with good people, which it is, but like the author of Acts is trying to show us 2,000 plus years later, Jesus Christ is still very present and is constantly moving throughout the world in little communities like ours, which we call church. And I hope we find with this a sense of pride and satisfaction for the work that we've done. But with this feeling also comes a deep, deep call and burden of responsibility. You see, the Humpty Dumpty syndrome is really a product of a world who has lost faith in institutions like ours, has forgotten that God moves through us. I don't think I need to provide examples, because as soon as you walk out these doors today, or you open your copy of the newspaper, or even turn on the internet, you're struck with stories of the world's brokenness over and over. And maybe the reason I not need provide examples of brokenness this morning is because as you sit here in the pews this morning, you're reminded of your own brokenness. And you not need another reminder of that. But that's why we gather here, week after week. It's not simply to worship, or to sing and hear beautiful music, or to hear a motivational lecture, but because we acknowledge that being here is good for us. Because it not only reminds us of our own brokenness, allows us that time to sit in the discomfort that comes with it, but it serves for us a reminder of God's healing work in our lives and through our lives. And it reminds us of the role this community must play in the world around us. And it's certainly happening. Oh, it certainly is. If you just run down the list of what we have here at CHT, we have the pastoral care ministry who visits those in the hospital and in homes. It's through the support of organizations like Homes with Hope and ICON and the Gillespie Center that this institution provides shelter for those who have none. Or it's through the recent support and long-time support, actually, of the St. John's Family Center in Bridgeport that we provide care for the families in that neighborhood who needs it. The call into this world cannot stop simply there. And if as you hear this list of institutions and you do not know about them or you'd like to be involved, please, oh please, see Whitney or I afterwards and let's talk about how we can get you involved in some of the many programs we have here. Or if there's one in your own heart, I'd love to hear about it. Anyone here would love to. Because the truth is that when we leave these doors today, we face a world that wants to know that we've been transformed by our experiences here. Because they need to know, they need to hear that God still loves them. To be reminded that they are not alone, that they're God's beloved. And maybe, just maybe, they wait for that invitation to join us here on a Sunday as well. Please don't be afraid to offer that invitation. God is moving through this space this morning, as God always does, and longs to be brought out into the communities in this world. I hope that each time we enter this space, we find ourselves transformed and are ready to impact the world around us. But more so, I hope that for those who interact with us this week, moving forward, that when they leave our presence, they are unable to ignore the fact that they have been in the presence of someone who has been transformed by the resurrected Lord. That they've just been in the presence of someone who represents something bigger than themselves. that they leave our presence knowing that they are loved, and allow ourselves to make an impact in this world. Amen.